It is Sunday, the 28th of May, and time for another unboxing video. You're going to get pretty sick of these, but so what? So, I've just got a delivery from Amazon US, and these are some books that I'm going to study myself, but to teach Edward, my son. My son is 8 years old. He doesn't have time to learn things that you'd usually learn at 8 years old because I'm not going to be around in the near future, really, to teach him things that he'll need when he's sort of 10, 12, 15, 18, whatever. I'm not going to be there for him. So what I'm trying to do now is teach him the things that he should be learning at those times, which sounds really stupid, but it's not. It's working okay. The kind of things he's learning now are things that, I didn't learn until quite recently. It's nonsense that you sort of need to build on incorrect foundational knowledge, step by step, and eventually one day you'll start to learn things that are maybe true, or at least more accurate ways of looking at the world. That's just not true. We're doing a great disservice to children by teaching them crap and just having this attitude that one day they'll learn stuff that's closer to reality. Buckminster Fuller was always going on about how we've known that the world has been round for a very long time. In fact, actually, I think we've always known. I mean, I think from what I've read about the history of the flat Earth theory, it's 3,000 years ago or whatever, when people were considering the shape of the Earth, they came to the conclusion it was round straight away. It was later on that people thought it was flat. Obviously, ancient Greeks spent quite a lot of time calculating the circumference of the Earth, so they must have thought it was round. So Buckminster Fuller was saying, well, why is it that we talk about sunrise and sunset when we know that the Earth is round and the Earth goes round the sun? Why do we talk about worldwide, not world around? So he did use the word world around. He didn't talk about sunrise, he talked about sunsight. He didn't talk about sunset, he talked about sun eclipse. So something that, I drill into my son. Might sound like a trivial example. Maybe Buckminster Fuller also talked about instairs and outstairs instead of downstairs and upstairs, because he thought the really important thing was moving towards or away from the centre of the Earth. Now, in a very short time, I think that really will be significant, because we'll be doing far more things at quite high altitudes, not just in orbit, but with the very tall buildings now, and even just with a long bridge, the pylons that support the bridge, that are built exactly 90 degrees to the Earth. With a long bridge, you can measure, a tiny difference between the distance between the base of the pylons and the top of the pylons because of the curvature of the Earth. So these things really do impact us, and we should really think about them, because when we're sloppy with language, that reflects sloppy thinking, but it also encourages sloppy thinking. Just as there are people who make a relatively convincing argument that language that's sort of racist or misogynistic or whatever kind of almost encourages racism and misogyny. So I'm tackling some quite difficult stuff with my son. I think very few 8-year-olds do learn about the mechanics of genetics and Darwinian evolution and that kind of thing, which we're still doing at the moment. And a couple of years, maybe when he was like 5 or something, we started doing 3-dimensional geometry, because in a sense that does make a lot of sense. There's no natural, I don't see any natural progression from 2D geometry to 3D geometry, and we live in a world that is 3D to some extent. A lot of stuff happens in 2 dimensions, but a lot of stuff happens in 3 dimensions. So he's very familiar with 5 platonic solids, for example. And we've made models of, particularly my favourite one, the icosahedron, which consists of 20 triangular faces in a sort of ball shape, which is the most efficient space enclosing 3D shape, other than, of course, the sphere. So we're tackling difficult stuff now, and that's why I got some books from Amazon. So we shall have a look and see what is here. This came from Amazon.com because it was considerably cheaper than Amazon Japan. Amazon Japan doesn't really give very big discounts on most books. Japan has quite a lot of protectionism for the publishing industry. Publishing is massive in Japan, and it's expensive as well. Japanese books tend to be quite expensive. Obviously the music industry here is huge as well, although it depends on your definition of music. So let us see what we have in here. I can't remember exactly what the books were. Because it's Amazon US, it's packaged far more poorly than Amazon Japan would be. Anyway, let's see. So, How to Solve It by Polya. This was recommended by my friend Arka Roy, and it's a book that I had heard about before, been thinking about getting it. This is a book about heuristics. Some people pronounce it heuristics, they're wrong. It's called, the word is heuristics, problem solving. The origin of the word comes from the word eureka, which Archimedes allegedly shouted when he was having a bath, and he noticed that as he got in the bath, obviously the water level rose, and he thought, aha, the water level must rise by the same amount of water displaced by the volume of my body, and I can therefore use this to easily find the volume of irregular 3D shapes. And the problem he had been set was he'd been given the emperor, I guess, or something, had been given a gold ring and wanting to know if it was really pure gold. So you'd want to know work out the density, which obviously requires knowing the weight, the volume as well as the weight. So this is a book about heuristics. It's written in terms of steps for solving mathematical problems, but obviously can be extended to solve any kind of problems. Really looking forward to studying this. And it's about systems for solving problems like how about, can you restate the problem? Can you map it to something that you've already solved? Could you derive something useful from the data? But yeah, various problem solving approaches. So really looking forward to that one. Let's see what we've got. I'm kind of taking a random. Scale by Geoffrey West. This is a book that just happened to come up on an Amazon recommendation, and without really looking at it properly or thinking about it, I thought that's clearly a book I need to read and do with Edward, because so many of the issues with humans and how we live are to do with scale and our lack of understanding about scale and particularly growth. Obviously, humans just do not fucking get exponential growth. Because when things are in the early stages of exponential growth, it's obviously indistinguishable from linear growth. I mean, you just look at the exponential growth curve, and yet, humans exist because of exponential growth, because of cell division. I mean, what is it? A baby is formed by 40 cell divisions, and in fact, actually, only 34 are required, I think, and there are 6 more for redundancy for kind of failures, I think, in cell division, although my knowledge of cellular mechanics is appalling, so maybe some of you know about that far better than I do. But yeah, I mean, the fact that a baby can form from actually a single zygote with 40 cell divisions. I mean, that's why we are all alive. Exponential growth is just everywhere in epidemics, in many situations. We can see it even just in everyday life. So the subtitle of this book is The Universal Laws of Growth, Innovation, Sustainability, and the Pace of Life in Organisms, Cities, Economies, and Companies. I guess I first got really interested in scale when I started studying the work of Douglas Engelbart. Engelbart, he got interested in scale, I guess in his early 20s maybe. He visited some aeroplane design research institutes, I think as part of his work in early radar systems towards the end of World War II or early 1950s. And he saw that at the aircraft design research institutes, they were using scale models of aeroplanes stuck in wind tunnels, and they had a whole mathematical framework for how you scaled up the effects that you were seeing. I mean, essentially, how do you interpret the results of the experiments? Because you're doing these experiments in a wind tunnel with coloured smoke or whatever, looking at how it flows over an aircraft wing cross-section, for example, and how does that relate to when you build the thing, whatever, 10 times bigger or whatever it would be. And of course, famously, he applied this kind of scaling to the lithographic process for making integrated circuits. And Engelbart is actually the person who really kind of foresaw microelectronics, and he's the person that taught Moore's law. more was in it, is in it, a lecture by Engelbart, and Engelbart was talking about how scaling worked, and then Moore went and sort of did a bit of did some calculations and looked at some historical data about transistor density, and he calculated, I think at the time, 2 years was the time taken to double transistor density. I think currently it's about 18 months, which basically says every year and a half you get double the computing power for the same money, or you can have the same computing power for half the money, or whatever. So scale is massively, massively important. Engelbart used to always, at the end of this thing in his lectures, he would say, what would happen if we were like 10 times bigger in each dimension? Would we notice if suddenly everyone was 10 times taller, 10 times wider, 10 times deeper? And sort of people would kind of wonder about this, and most people come to the conclusion that you wouldn't notice if you were instantly you and so your environment were 10 times bigger in every dimension. You wouldn't notice. Actually, what would happen is you'd be dead instantly. There's some bizarre announcement happening in the background. So this is someone driving around in a truck offering to take away your electrical goods for a small fee. Anyway, because for example, you would be 1,000 times heavier, but your bones would only be 100 times stronger, because the strength of a bone is the cross-sectional area, dependent on the cross-sectional area, not the volume. Your vision, again, is to do with the area of the retina. You'd also have problems with you get massively hot because your surface area, your skin surface area would increases at a lower rate than your volume increases as you expand in each dimension. So just as if there were tiny humans, they would freeze to death because they'd have far too much skin relative to the volume of their bodies. So yeah, scale is massively important. So I shall be reading this book and working through the key points with Edward. Yeah, looked pretty good. I'd never heard of it before. Just come up on the Amazon recommendations. So that's 2 books: How to Solve It and Scale. Running out of desk space to keep them. And I think there is 2 more. Oh. Okay. The Society of Mind. This was really cheap. I think this was like $8 or something on Amazon. Something insanely cheap. So this is it's by Marvin Minsky, who is often described as the father of artificial intelligence. But it's his work with Simon Papert, and so yeah, I think Minsky wrote this when he was at MIT, and it's a model of how human thought may work. And yeah, it's a classic book that anyone interested in thought and artificial intelligence and stuff like that should read, which I haven't read yet, which is what I'm going to do now. And then last book is just a fun book. to do with my son, the Hobbyist Guide to the RTL SDR. SDR is software defined radio. RTL is a very, very, very cheap software defined radio receiver that is a modified digital TV receiver, and you hook it up to your computer via USB and plug in an antenna, and you can pick up a very wide range of radio signals, and there's loads of free software that lets you decode those signals. If they're data, for example, you can pick up transmissions from weather satellites, for example, and see the weather on your computer, pager signals, that kind of thing. Lots of fun stuff. So that's just kind of a fun book to go through with my son, Edward, and get him sort of thinking a bit more about the radio spectrum, because humans are we're so biased towards the visible light spectrum, which is just a tiny, tiny, tiny part of the RF spectrum, and it's just fascinating that there's so much cool stuff flying around everywhere all the time. And many animals, their vision is in a completely different part of the spectrum. Some animals have, like rattlesnakes, have like indentations above their eyes that allow them to see in part of the infrared spectrum. Obviously, many animals listen. That part of their hearing goes into what we would call ultrasound, which they use for navigation, that kind of thing. So that's the main reason why I'm trying to get my son into radio and kind of understanding about RF. Okay, thanks for watching. As usual, my cancer fundraising website is at www.matthewdons.org. That's mathewdons.org. Please share the link, or if you can, make a donation, because I'm desperate for money to pay for more treatment, really. And I also need to start getting some money for end-of-life treatment, like end-of-life care in a hospice, and funeral expenses and stuff like that, to make things a little bit easier for my family when I die. Okay, thanks a lot.